Hello and welcome to today's video. So this time something a little bit different. I've got two books to try and clean up. Now these are really old ones from 1900 and they are in, well, it's fair to say, quite the state. So sit back, relax and let's get to it. Okay then, so initially we'll just have a little look over these books. Now there's two volumes and they're both going to need cleaning, and I think I'm going to do volume 1, which I think is this one first of all, and this is actually in the worst condition, but since it's over this side we'll just have a little look at volume 2. And you see they're absolutely huge books. It's Gilbert White's Selborne. That's the subject of this cleaning video, and these were published in 1900, this pair of books. Now, internally I don't think we're going to have loads of work to do, although we are going to need to go through every single page. The tops are quite dusty and dirty. I mean, look at the state of that. That is not a pretty sight. So they're going to need really a real good brush. In fact, all the edges will be. But it's predominantly this cover, which is made of vellum. And it's white, so it absolutely shows up every little bit of muck. And this has got 126 years worth of muck on it. And I'm not really sure how well this is going to come out. Some of it is scratches. Some of it I'm thinking is just like dirt from fingerprints and stuff. And I have done some research, and a lot of people say that with this, it is literally just a case of using a soft rubber. So a plastic rubber. So that's what we're going to have to do. With regards to these bits where the book has obviously been dropped and it's banged in the edges, I'm going to take some advice on this, but I don't know if there's much we can do to bend them back into shape. But I've got a couple of ideas about possibly something to try once we've cleaned the books up as best we can. They're both in similar sort of condition. Number 2, which is that one, I think is actually slightly better than book 1. And I think when you see this book, because this book is still in print today, it was an absolute bestseller, if you can believe it. And looking through it, it is, you can sort of see why. But this is book 1, and this one was probably read more than book 2. And this has got more wear to it, particularly around the top edge of the spine there. It looks as if, yeah, I don't know what it is. There's all sorts of stuff in here. Very, very dirty. A few pages are turned over. But look at the cover here. Whether we can do much with regards to this, I really, really don't know. It's not going to be an easy job. This set was limited upon publication to, they printed 160 copies and that was it. 150 of them were numbered, and then 10 of them were presentation copies. So I think this is number 125. Now this is number 25 of 150 copies. But yeah, a bit dusty, a bit dirty along the edges, but it's these covers which are absolutely, well, they're appalling. But, you know, you can see it now. And apparently what we must not do with this is get it wet. Now, I think that's actually got wet at some point. That might be a splodge of something. But yeah, we're not to get any water on this, because it will potentially shrink the vellum and tighten it, and that will ruin the book. However, I think once we've cleaned it off, there are some materials that we might be able to use just to buff it up a little bit. So I'm going to obviously try in very small areas, somewhere inconspicuous, and we'll see how we get on, basically. But I'm going to start with book 1, and I'm not going to speak during this. However, when I get into the editing suite and I pull this video together, in potentially quiet moments, I will regale you with the story of this incredible book, because it is quite incredible, and it was an inspiration for a lot of people upon publication. Even people around today, people like David Attenborough, for example, read it and highly raved about it. So the history of this book is actually also fascinating. I'll tell you a little bit about that while we're cleaning it. But I think I've got a couple of different rubbers to try first of all, and I'm going to mix it up a little bit. I'm going to do some rubbing, see if we can get a section of the cover looking good. Then I think I'm going to maybe try and do the edges, and we'll do a little bit of each, and I'll just mix it up a little bit as we go along. But I'm going to do an hour's worth of cleaning, and I expect this to be probably a 2-hour or 2-part sort of video. So well, we'll see how we get on anyway. Okay, so I use a soft rubber, which is, you know, when I looked up online about how to clean vellum, this was the result that came out most often. It was use a soft rubber. Now I've got a couple of rubbers that I use. This first one is my go-to, really. I've got a couple of these. They're from Japan, both the rubbers that I use, and this one is very, very good on vintage paperbacks. However, I've got another one there, and you can just see it in the background. That's also from Japan, and that one, in this particular case, proved to be a little bit more effective on the vellum. No idea why that is. Maybe it's ever so slightly more abrasive than the one that I'm using there, the Pental. But yeah, I tried them both, and my other one tended to do the trick. So what I thought I'd do whilst we're watching me clean is I'll tell you a little bit about the natural history of Selborne, the book itself and the author, from information that I've garnered online. It is an absolutely key book. I mean, it really, really is. And I had no real idea about its importance, really. I mean, the only time I'd ever come across this before, as you know, I collect Penguin books, and Penguin published their edition of it, and it was a one-volume edition in, I think, 1936 or 1937. And yeah, it's a really, really nice illustrated Penguin edition, and I can see now why they published it. Probably the rights were very cheap at the time for Penguin because it was an older book, but also it was a book of quality that probably Alan Lane wanted in his Penguin list, really. But yeah, so this is the rubber that I'm using now. I haven't used this one for a while because, as I said, on paperbacks, it's a little bit more abrasive than I perhaps would like. But it's slightly bigger. So for this particular job where there's a lot of rubbing out to do, I thought, well, I'll use this one and see how I get on. And ultimately, this was the one that proved to be the most effective on these particular books. So, and as I said, I'm just trying to do this like bottom section here just to get an inkling of how much is going to be involved here. So while you see me do that, I'll give you a bit of history about the natural history of Selborne. And this is stuff that I found online, and it is really quite interesting. The Natural History and Antiquities of Selborne, or just the Natural History of Selborne, is a book by English parson naturalist Gilbert White, who lived from 1720 to 1793. It was first published in 1789 by his brother Benjamin. It has been continuously in print since then, with nearly 300 editions up to 2007. The book was published late in White's life, compiled from a mixture of his letters to other naturalists, Thomas Pennant and Daines Barrington. A naturalist calendar, in the second edition, comparing phenology, observations made by White and William Markwick, of the first appearances in the year of different animals and plants, and observations of natural history organised more or less systematically by species and group. A second volume, less often reprinted, covered the Antiquities of Selborne. Some of the letters were never posted and were written for the book. White's natural history was at once well received by contemporary critics and the public, and continued to be admired by a diverse range of 19th and 20th century literary figures. His work has been seen as an early contribution to ecology, and in particular to phenology. The book has been enjoyed for its charm and apparent simplicity, and the way that it creates a vision of pre-industrial England. The original manuscript has been preserved and is displayed in the Gilbert White Museum at the Wakes, Selborne. And we'll look into a little bit more about the Gilbert White Museum later on, or maybe in the next episode. Now, the main part of the book, the natural history, is presented as a compilation of 44 letters, nominally to Thomas Pennant, a leading British zoologist of the day, and 66 letters to Daines Barrington, an English barrister and Fellow of the Royal Society. In these letters, White details the natural history of the area around his family home at the Vicarage of Selborne in Hampshire. And yeah, that's just a little start to the history of the book. And as you can see, it is almost like night and day. I mean, you can just see a clear line, which is where I've worked that cover already. The mess in the studio with rubber shavings was considerable. Now, the book is incredibly well made, so the vellum wraps underneath. And it's got a pretty decent binding on it as well, considering its age. This particular edition was published in 1900, and as I said, it was limited to just 160 copies, which is not a lot when you think about it. I've been able to find 3 online, and got 3 copies, as in the pairs of the books, because the 2 volumes, so 3 complete editions for sale. One of them was one of the presentation copies, and they were A, B, C, D, E, F, G, so they were lettered. And then I found 2 numbered copies, and they do range in price, but on average they're about £400 to £500 for the pair of books. That's in nice shape. All the copies I've seen, the rice paper or tissue paper plates, well, there's a covering to each illustration within the book, and that rice paper has aged and browned on all the editions that I found online. So I think that's just a reaction over time rather than the book being exposed to any particular sort of environment. Anyway, a bit more about the book then. So many of the letters were never posted and were written especially for the book. Patrick Armstrong, in his book The English Parson Naturalist, notes that in particular an obvious example is the first, nominally to Thomas Pennant, but which is clearly contrived, as it introduces the parish, briefly summarising its position, geography, and principal physical features. White's biographer, Richard Mabey, estimates that up to 46 out of 66 letters to Daines Barrington were probably never even sent through the post. Mabey explains that it's hard to be more precise because of White's extensive editing. Some letters are dated, although never sent. Some dates have been altered, and some letters have been cut down, split into shorter letters, merged or distributed in small parts into other letters. A section about insect-eating birds in a letter sent to Barrington in 1770 appears in the book as letter 41 to Pennant. Personal remarks have been removed throughout. Thus, while the book is genuinely based on letters to Pennant and Barrington, the structure of the book is a literary device. Now, as a compilation of letters and other materials, the book as a whole has an uneven structure. The first part is a diary-like sequence of letters with the breaks and wanderings that naturally follow. The second is a calendar, organised by phenological events around the year. The third is a collection of observations, organised by animal or plant group and species, with a section on meteorology. The apparently rambling structure of the book is in fact bracketed by opening and closing sections, arranged like the rest of the letters, which give form and scale and even a semblance of narrative structure to what would otherwise have been a shapeless anthology. And there we are. It just looks better and better, doesn't it, the book? But look how long it's taken just to do that one little section. And I do get quicker, as we work our way around. That piece near the emblem in the middle, so that emblem, I believe, was hand painted. So it's popped on and hand coloured in on each edition, and you can see it's already a little bit worn. The other one's not as bad, so I'm in 2 minds what to do about that. I could touch it up with some pencils. I'm quite proficient at sort of doing that, and I might do that because we are doing a restoration job on it after all. On the spine, some of the red lettering has also rubbed out. It's already been worn through handling, so we'll see on that. And when I get to the spine later on in the video, you'll see it was not easy. I struggled a little bit. I almost feel I could have used the book to be in a vice. And at one point I do actually stand up and try and clean the spine stood up. I'm not sure how I'm going to be able to do that because it's just very, very difficult to film it whilst I'm in the studio here whilst cleaning it. Anyway, here is the first unposted letter, so letter number 1 from the book. It's not very long, but it says, "The parish of Selbourne lies in the extreme eastern corner of the county of Hampshire, bordering on the county of Sussex, and not far from the county of Surrey. Is about 50 miles southwest of London, in latitude 51, and near midway between the towns of Alton and Petersfield. Being very large and extensive, it abuts on 12 parishes, 2 of which are in Sussex, viz. Trotton and Rogate. The soils of this district are almost as various and diversified as the views and aspects. The high part of the southwest consists of a vast hill of chalk, rising 300 feet above the village, and is divided into a sheep down, the high wood, and a long hanging wood called the Hanger. The covert of this eminence is altogether beech, the most lovely of all forest trees, whether we consider its smooth rind or bark, its glossy foliage, or graceful pendulous boughs. The down or sheep walk is a pleasing park-like spot of about 1 mile by half that space, jutting out on the verge of the hill country, where it begins to break down into the plains and commanding a very engaging view. Being an assemblage of hill, dale, woodlands, heath and water, the prospect is bounded to the southeast and east by the vast range of mountains called the Sussex Downs, by Gill Down near Guildford, and by the downs rounding Dorking and Reigate in Surrey to the northeast, which altogether, with the country beyond Alton and Farnham, form a noble and extensive outline." "No novelist could have opened better," wrote Virginia Woolf. "Selborne is set solidly in the foreground." And here I am working my way around the edges a bit more. I've got to admit, this is one of my most satisfying cleans, and although I'm recording this after I've only filmed part 1, it really was quite therapeutic, very, very relaxing to clean books like this and get them looking as good as possible. And when I found out a little bit more about the book itself, I felt like I was preserving a little bit of history, really. I'm in very much 2 minds whether I want to move this one on. They are huge and they take up a lot of room, but at the same time it's a really gorgeous edition, and if I can get them really cleaned up, I'm going to be quite reluctant to get rid of them ultimately. But see what you think after this first episode and the progress that we've made. Now, a little bit about the illustrations. So the first edition was illustrated with paintings by the Swiss artist Samuel Hieronymus Grimm, engraved by W. Angus, and acquainted. Grimm had lived in England since 1768 and was quite a famous artist, costing 2.5 guineas per week. In the event, he stayed in Selborne for 28 days, and White recorded that he worked very hard on 24 of them. White also described Grimm's methods, which was to sketch the landscape in lead pencil, then to put in the shading, and finally to add a light wash of watercolour. The illustrations were engraved, signed at lower right, by a variety of engravers, including William Angus and Peter Mazel. Now, this edition is illustrated. I don't think it's by the original contributors, but this edition is also a signed one, and I think it's signed by the person who edited it and brought the edition together, plus I believe 3 or 4 of the illustrators who are used within. So it is quite a handsome limited edition with the signatures as well, so I'm really, really pleased about that. So the letters to Thomas Pennant then. So there are 44 letters to White's friend Thomas Pennant, who lived from 1726 to 1798, of which the first 9 were never posted and are thus undated. Of those that were posted, the first, letter 10, giving an overview of Selbourne, is dated the 4th of August 1767. The last, letter 44, on wood pigeons, is dated the 30th of November 1780. It is not known how the men became friends, or even if they ever met. White writes repeatedly that he would like to meet, to have a little conversation face to face, after we have corresponded so freely for several years. So it is certain they did not meet for long periods, and possibly they never met at all. The letters are edited from the form in which they were actually posted. For example, letter 10 as posted had a cringing introductory paragraph of thanks to Pennant, which White edited out of the published version. Now the letters to the Honourable Daines Barrington, so there are 66 letters to the lawyer Daines Barrington, and he lived from 1727 to 1800, and they occupy half the book. Letter 1 on Summer Birds of Passage is dated the 30th of June 1769. Letter 66 on Thunderstorms is dated the 25th of June 1787. The Barrington letters therefore largely overlap the time frame of those to Pennant, but began and ended somewhat later. It was Barrington who suggested to White that he should write a book from his observations. Although Pennant had been corresponding with White for a while, he was relying on White for natural history information for his own books, and suggests White's biographer, Richard Mabey, must have wanted White as a continuing source of information, not as a rival author. Barrington, on the other hand, liked to theorize about the natural world, but had little interest in making observations himself, and tended to accept claimed facts uncritically. A character in some of the letters is a tortoise. The old tortoise that I have mentioned in a former letter still continues in this garden, and retired underground about the 20th of November, and came out again for one day on the 30th. It lies now buried in a wet, swampy border under a wall facing to the south, and is enveloped at present in mud and mire. Letter 65 describes the summer of 1783 as an amazing and portentous one, and full of horrible phenomena, for besides the alarming meteors and tremendous thunderstorms that affrighted and distressed the different counties of this kingdom, the peculiar haze or smoky fog that prevailed for many weeks in this island and in every part of Europe, and even beyond its limits, was a most extraordinary appearance, unlike anything known within the memory of a man. The sun at noon looked as blank as a clouded moon, and shed a rust-coloured ferrugous light on the ground and floors of rooms, but was particularly lurid and blood-coloured at rising and setting. All this time the heat was so intense that butcher's meat could hardly be eaten on the day after it was killed. Now this was caused by the eruption of the Laki volcano in Iceland between the 8th of June 1783 and February 1784, killing up to a quarter of the people of Iceland and spreading a haze as far as Egypt. So I'm certainly making progress here, and I sort of I've seen these sorts of things where like a restorer might go around and tidy up a an old painting, for example, and obviously they've got, it's much more complicated than repairing a book, and I'm not trained. I'm self-trained, and I just use the methods that have worked for me over the years. I've got some ideas about what to do once I've taken off most of the cover muck, about what's left with the stains. And I think it's going to be a little combination of trying a few little things in spots which aren't too obvious, and then we'll see what works, basically. But yeah, working our way through, and you can really see where I've just done the outside edges, how we're making real progress on this. And it was an effort, I'm not kidding, and it was something that I'm going to tackle over, I think, probably the best part of a month, and I'll try and do an hour or two until these are both done, basically as good as I can get them. As I say, I need to do a little bit more research once I've done my initial clean, and well, we'll take it from there. But there is a lot to these, and I have cleaned books from this age before. I cleaned a couple of Churchill books from just this sort of decade, in fact, and they weren't as bad as this, but I didn't film it. But like the top edges in that were particularly mucky, and I spent about half an hour just brushing it until it eventually got all the muck out of the Churchill ones. And I do give these a brush in this video, this first one at least. But I think I'm going to need to revisit it in a bit more detail and really slowly work my way through it. One thing that's a bit weird is that the top edge, as you can see, is flush, so that will clean off quite nicely. But the other edges, the pages are uncut, and they very much remind me of like privately printed books of the period, which are often like that. I'm thinking of things like the Golden Cockerel Press, where all their books, they're in a nice cover, but then the books themselves are untrimmed, the pages. I think it's just, a thing that happens with private press books. So the next bit then is on the Antiquities of Selborne. So this section, often omitted from the later editions, consists, like the natural history, of 26 letters, none of them posted, and without even the fiction of being addressed to Pennant or Barrington. Letter 1 begins, "It is reasonable to suppose that in remote ages this woody and mountainous district was inhabited only by bears and wolves." Letter 2 discusses Selborne in Saxon times. Selborne was, according to White, a royal manor belonging to Editha, queen to Edward the Confessor. Letter 3 describes the village's church, which has no pretensions to antiquity and is, I suppose, of no earlier date than from the beginning of the reign of Henry VII. Letter 5 describes the ancient yew tree in the churchyard. Letter 7 describes the ruined priory. Letter 11 discusses the properties of the Knights Templar in and near the village. Letter 14 describes the visit of Bishop William of Wickham in 1373 to correct the scandalous particular abuses in the religious houses in the parish. He orders the canons of Selborne Priory, item 5th, to take care that the doors of the church and priory be so attended to that no suspected and disorderly females, suspecti at ally in honesty, pass through their choir and cloister in the dark. Item 10, to cease living dissolutely after the flesh and not after the spirit, as it had been proven that some of the canons sleep naked in their beds without their breeches and shirts. Item 11th, to stop keeping hounds and publicly attending hunting matches and noisy, tumultuous huntings. Item 17th, to properly maintain their houses and the convent itself, since they have allowed, through neglect, notorious dilapidations to take place. Item 29th, to stop wearing foppish ornaments and the affections of appearing like bow and garments edged with costly furs, with fringed gloves and silken girdles, trimmed with gold and silver. Richard Mabey describes White's reaction to the Priory saga as grave disapproval of the monks, sensuality and general delinquency. A sequence of letters that relate to the history of the Priors of Selborne until letter 24, which relates to the takeover of the Priory by Magdalen College, Oxford, under Bishop William Wainfleet in 1459. White describes this as a disastrous fall. Thus fell the considerable and well-endowed priory of Selborne after it had subsisted around about 254 years, about 74 years after the suppression of priories alien by Henry V, and about 50 years before the general dissolution of the monasteries by Henry VIII. The final letter records that no sooner did the priory become an appendage to the college, but it must at once have tended to swift decay. White notes that since then, even the very foundations have been torn up for the repair of the highways, so that nothing is left but a rough pasture, full of hillocks and pits, choked with nettles and dwarf elder, and trampled by the feet of the ox and the heifer. White had reason to be bitter about the takeover by Magdalen College, as it had made them lords of the manor of Selborne, which in turn gave them the right to appoint the parish priest. White's biographer, Richard Mabey, cast doubt on the frequent assumption that White's deepest regret was that he could never be vicar of Selborne, but it was true that he was illegible, as only fellows of Magdalen could be granted the living. As you can see here, I'm working my way around the hand-painted logo on the front. I guess that's the emblem of Selborne, and it's basically that's like a pasted down item that's then being hand-painted, I believe, or they were painted beforehand and then pasted onto the front cover of the book or laid in. It's quite difficult to tell, but it's reasonably clean. But I think I could improve that possibly with, I said, with possibly a little bit of just pencil. But as I'm cleaning it, I'm uncovering more of these little black specks, and this is where something's got basically pressed into the soft vellum cover, and it's made it. It's just basically been there for decades and decades, potentially over 100 years. And in that time, this book has obviously suffered a little bit, and it's been through the wars, quite literally. And well, it is what it is. It's a key part of this edition, so I want it looking as clean as possible. So I'm just doing around it, as you can see, and I'm using more of a swirly motion with the rubber here, just so I don't rub the actual logo too much. Now, another part of the book is a naturalist calendar from the year 1768 to the year 1793. Now, this section, compiled posthumously, contains a list of some 500 phenological observations in Selborne from White's manuscripts, organised by William Marwick. He lived from 1739 to 1812, and supplemented by Marwick's own observations from Catsfield, near Battle in Sussex. The observations depend on the latitude of these places and on the global climate, forming a baseline for comparison with modern observations. For example, Cuculus canorus, herd, is recorded by White for the 7th to the 26th of April, and by Marwick for 15th of April and 3rd of May, presumably only once at the earlier date, and last heard by Marwick on the 28th of June. There are observations in various branches of natural history. So, observation on birds, this is the longest section of the observations, with comments in each instance by Marwick. Observation on quadruplets. These are few entries on sheep, rabbits, cats and squirrels, horses and hounds. Observation on insects and vermes. The vermes cover glowworms, earthworms, snails and slugs, and a snake's slough, a cast skin. Observations on vegetables. The observations relate to trees, seeds, beans sown by birds, cucumbers set by bees, and a few fungi, truffles, Tremilia nostrop, and fairy rings. meteorological observations. There are a few curiosities such as frozen sleet and the Black Spring of 1771. He also recorded the effects of the weather of the 1783 volcanic eruption of the Icelandic crater Laki. You can see here now I've made some real progress around the actual emblem, and you can see there's an awful long way still to go, but it's more like, you know, this is it now, rubbing it wholesale and working my way through. I mean, I think once I've probably cleaned it, I'm going to go over it once again with a real fine-tooth comb and make sure I've got absolutely every little mark that I can possibly get off removed. But when you think this is still just the front cover, it just shows you how much work was involved. And but what a difference. I mean, just incredible, really. Absolutely incredible. White's lifelong friend, John Mulso, wrote to him in 1776, correctly predicting that your work, upon the whole, will immortalize your place of abode as well as yourself. Thomas White wrote a long, appreciative, but properly restrained review of his brother's book in The Gentleman's Magazine of January 1789, commenting that sagacity of observation runs through the work. An anonymous reviewer in The Topographer of April 1789 wrote that a more delightful or more original work than Mr. White's History of Selborne has seldom been published. Natural history has evidently been the author's principal study, and of that, ornithology is evidently the favourite. The book is not a compilation from former publications, but the result of many years' attentive observations to nature itself, which are told not only with the precision of a philosopher, but with that happy selection of circumstances which mark the poet. In the 19th century, in 1830, an anonymous critic, in which Tobias Manili called a description of Selbourne as a place that lingers beyond the spatio-temporal horizon of modern life, wrote, having visited the village, that the sequestered retreat of the naturalist still remains, inaccessible to all the improved knowledge and refinement which belong to these enlightened and virtuous times. It has been excluded from the blessings of increasing commerce and population, from factories and philetations, manufactures and methodism, genius and gin, prosperity and pauperism. The book was widely admired by contemporary writers. Samuel Taylor Coleridge called it a sweet, delightful book. John Clare imitated its style of natural history letters. Thomas Carlyle wrote that it was one of the most excellent books. White, a quiet country parson, has preached a better sermon here than all the loud bishops that then were. Charles Darwin is said to have been delighted by it. Circa 1862, the retired surgeon and zoologist Thomas Bell moved to the Wakes. He devoted his time to studying White's work and editing new editions of the work. And there we are, that front cover is almost done. For the initial clean through, I mean, and what a difference. I mean, it just looks beautiful and creamy and so much whiter than it ever did. I still feel that when I've cleaned everything, I'm going to need to go over these with a fine-tooth comb once again. But you can see it's really, it actually feels cleaner in the hand, whereas initially the books just felt so disgustingly dirty. That is quite nice. And I do feel the top right there, I do feel it's got a splodge of some sort of liquid historically on it. We've cleaned up what we can, but whether I'll be able to get a little bit of staining off, a few odd marks here or there, almost like rust marks. Well, I've got a few ideas about that, and well, we'll have to wait and see. I'm going to sort of experiment a little bit and see how we get on. But that was just really the front cover, and it just shows what a massive job there is. I'm there carefully looking at that front emblem, and I'm convinced they're like hand painted on those. Just some Edwardian era reviews. So the 1907 to 1921 Cambridge History of English and American Literature begins its essay on White's Selborne with these words. Gilbert White's Natural History and Antiquities of Selborne, 1789, holds a unique position in English literature as the solitary classic of natural history. It is not easy to give, in a few words, a reason for its remarkable success. It is, in fact, not so much a logically arranged and systematic book as an invaluable record of the life work of a simple and refined man who succeeded in picturing himself as well as what he saw. The reader is carried along by his interest in the results of far-sighted observation, but more than this, the reader imbibes the spirit of the writer, which pervades the whole book and endears it to like-minded naturalists as a valued companion. Now we'll just see how I get on brushing the sides now. There we are. If you compare the two side by side, the difference is incredible. Now, this here that I'm rubbing out, this was put in by a bookseller. I have no idea how long ago, but it doesn't give us any information that we don't already know. I was able to find this edition without too much trouble online, and yeah, it is what it is. But we definitely don't need an old bookseller's annotations inside. It's not how the book was published, and we don't need it. We just don't need it. It's not being sold in a shop, and it may be part of its history, but it's only an old bookseller's information at the end of the day, and it's not something that's important. So here's a more modern take on the book. So White is sometimes treated as a pioneer of ecology. The British ornithologist James Fisher gives a more balanced view, writing in 1941. He says his world is round and simple and complete, the British country the perfect escape. The medical historian Richard Barnett writes that White has the strange power to make natural historians of his readers, whether gardeners, historians or biologists. Noting that this demands analysis, he observes further that White is straight out of Jane Austen. If it were not for his fame as a naturalist and writer. There we are, there's the signatures by the way. Very, very nice. Yes, if it was not for his fame as a naturalist and writer, nothing in his life would distinguish him from hundreds of country parsons in the 18th and 19th centuries. The natural history of Selborne is an oddly unassuming masterpiece, its haphazard construction revealing the process by which White came to write it. Barnett notes too that part of White's appeal lies in his ability to summon a powerful, particular vision of pre-industrial England. He offers his readers the key to a walled garden of mellow Queen Anne brick, lying beside Thomas Gray's country churchyard and an ancient water meadow. Now here I am looking at the spine, and it's not a great sight, in all honesty. It's very, very tricky to try and clean. It really isn't great, but I sort of put my thumb underneath the top of the spine, and when I'm rubbing, I'm more rubbing against my thumb nail than anything else. Yeah, quite tricky, this spine, and I still don't feel even now that I've quite tackled it properly, but I've not done a bad job, as you'll see. But yeah, the spine was particularly quite bad on this. So Yale non-fiction tutor Fred Stibor, writing in Audubon magazine in 1988, compared White with Henry Thoreau's Walden. Out of the ruts and the ways of its village, Selborne fashioned a new natural history. It spoke simply with a human voice, but it looked profoundly. It pioneered a way for students of nature who wished, as White did, not to roam the high Arctic or far Pacific, but to fathom their own terrain. It offered a wide world to anyone willing to dig deep. Selborne said, "Watch narrowly, skim close to the ground." It whispered, hushed. What Thoreau would later broadcast, "We are acquainted with a mere pellicule of the globe on which we live. Most have not delved 6 feet beneath the surface, nor leaped as many above it. We know not where we are." In those words, as in all Walden, Thoreau may have had in mind the village of Selborne and the Reverend Gilbert White. The town reached only by ruts running well beneath the surface, the man whose book had leapt the ruts to round the globe. Tobias Manili of Indiana University notes that the book has garnered praise from Coleridge, Carlyle, Darwin, Ruskin, Wolfe and Auden, and that Selborne's reputation in the 200 years since its initial publication offers a vivid instance of the retrospective idealization that transforms history into heritage. The naturalist Richard Mabey writes in his biography of White that, "I must confess that, like many others, I did not come painlessly to the natural history. For years I was put off by the aura of sanctity and bluffness which seemed to surround it. It was the kind of book presented on prize-giving days, and I saw it as a work in all senses of the old school. Even when I eventually came to read it, I cannot say my opinion changed dramatically. I could not cope at first with its rambling disorder, its sudden plunges into thickets of taxonomic Latin, and for a while I failed to notice the feeling behind the often dispassionate prose." Virginia Woolf liked the book enough to devote an essay in her The Captain's Deathbed and Other Essays, White's Selborne, to it, stating that the start of the book is like a novel. Now a bit about the manuscript. So the manuscript for the book stayed in the White family until 1895, when it was auctioned at Sotheby's. The purchaser was Stuart M. Samuel, who mounted the letters and bound the book in green Morocco leather. His library was sold in 1907. The manuscript was bought by the dealer A.S.W. Rosenbach in 1923, and passed into the collection of Arthur A. Houghton. The Houghton collection was auctioned by Christie's in 1980, where the manuscript was purchased by and for Gilbert White's House and Gardens at the Wake, Selbourne, where it is displayed. Since 2018, the complete manuscript is digitised and online available at the website of Gilbert White's house. You see, we are making progress here on the spine, but it is very, very slow progress, and it was fiddly to film, so my hand was sort of covering up the work that I'm doing. But you can see just how grim that spine is compared to the back cover in the foreground there, and the back cover hasn't even been cleaned yet. So the spine is where the worst of the muck has been sort of picked up, really, and that's not unusual. If the book has been on a shelf, it could be exposed to cigarette smoke, cigar smoke, open coal fires, all sorts of things, really. I've no idea how much this particular edition was when it was published, but it couldn't have been cheap. It would have been, quite expensive, I would suspect. Now we've just got one last little piece to read, which is its legacy. So Thomas Bewick, in the first volume, Land Birds of his A History of British Birds, from 1797, presents a phonological list of 19 birds which are chiefly selected from Mr. White's Natural History of Selborne and are arranged nearly in the order of their appearing. The list begins with the wryneck, middle of March, places the cuckoo in the middle of April, and ends with the flycatcher in the middle of May. Charles Darwin read the Natural History as a young man, inspiring him to take much pleasure in watching the habits of birds, and to wonder why every gentleman did not become an ornithologist. Sarah Losh, too, read the Natural History as part of her wonderful, varied and advanced home education for a young girl. White's Natural History has been continuously in print since its first publication. It was long held, apocryphally according to White's biographer Richard Mabey, to be the fourth most published book in the English language after the Bible, the works of Shakespeare and John Bunyan's The Pilgrim's Progress. White's frequent accounts in the Natural History and Antiquities of Selborne of his tortoise, Timothy, inherited from his aunt, form the basis for a variety of literary mentions. Verling Klinkenberg's book Timothy, or Notes of an Abject Reptile from 2006, is based solely on that reptile, as is Sylvia Townsend Warner's The Portrait of a Tortoise from 1946. The tortoise also finds its way into science as its species. Testudio whitei Bennett from 1936, long thought to be a pseudonym of Testudio gracia, has been rediscovered in Algeria. Various writers have commented on the book. The poet Samuel Taylor Coleridge called it "this sweet, delightful book," and novelist Virginia Woolf observed that by some apparently unconscious device, a door is left open through which we hear distant sounds among poets. Edward Thomas wrote that in this present year, 1915 at least, it is hard to find a flaw in the life that he led, while W.H. Auden stated that selfishly, I too would have plumbed to know you. I could have learned so much. The naturalist and broadcaster David Attenborough called White a man in total harmony with his world. The novelist Roald Dahl has the main character in his short story The Visitor read the book. The writer and zookeeper Gerald Durrell commented in The Amateur Naturalist that White simply observed nature with a sharp eye and wrote lovingly about it. And there we are. Well, so ends the history lesson today, and I think it is quite nice to know a little bit about such a key work, which this evidently is. It really, really is. And, well, we're making progress on the spine, but it is slow progress, and I am sort of working my way around the edges there and slowly working into the middle. I'm being careful around the red writing, the sort of more orange writing, really, on the spine. It's already been rubbed off a bit, so I'm just having to tread carefully there. I'm doing this part stood up now. And yeah, I'm going to try and do at least an hour or two every single week until I've got both volumes looking spick and span. And that's going to give me a bit more time to research different techniques to get off the little blodges and smudges that the rubber hasn't got off. And as I said, being vellum, we just need to tread very, very carefully. You can see there's another sort of crest on the spine there. Once again, that's been stuck on, but it's not coloured. It's more like that sort of gold colour. It's not been hand coloured in. So we just need to, once again, just be careful around that. I don't want to damage it in any way. Yeah, I can assure you I had aching arms come the end of this this particular cleaning session. But I thought you'd enjoy it. It's something that's been on my radar for the last month or so since these books came my way, and it was nice to have a bit of a break from doing penguin books, of which you've seen an awful lot just recently. Yeah, I think the spine was possibly the hardest part of this book, certainly so far. It's much harder than the cover, and it's just, I think if I had a vice, I think it would make a difference. So I'm going to have a little play around with this. I might have to just sit in front of the TV and spend an hour just carefully rubbing it, and because I think it's you know, although we're getting off the worst of it here, I think it's just far worse than you can really see. Absolutely appalling. Yeah, but I admit I was pretty worn out after doing all this, I can tell you that. But I think the results speak for themselves. I mean, it just feels better in the hand when the book is not so grubby. And you've got to remember its age. It's 126 years since this book was published. And this has never, ever, ever been cleaned. It's just been, you know, read and added to and got dirtier and dirtier over the decades. So I feel really privileged to be able to rescue this one and give it a new lease of life, really. You know, even if I don't decide to keep this, someone else is going to really enjoy this. And it is a key book. I mean, you know, we've just read all the history there about it. It is an absolutely key book in its field. Yeah, there's that orange emblem. It looks pretty nice actually, but look at the staining around it. And evidently it's been on a shelf and it's got splattered with some sort of liquid at some point. There's so many things wrong with that spine that what I've done is really only scratching the surface, really. There's so much more that I think is going to need to be done over the covers in general to get them looking really, really tip-top. But one thing at a time. This was just the first stab, you know, the first little step to try and get these looking as nice as possible. And the initial difference was just incredible. I think you'll agree. Yeah, still quite a bit to do on that spine, I feel. But certainly better than what it was. Okay, so that's the first hour into these two books, and this is the one we've obviously been cleaning, and that's the one which is still to be done. And I think you could say, well, we've made some progress. I mean, it's not perfect by any means. There's still, I would say, some work to be done on the spines. There's the one that we've cleaned so far. I think that still needs a little bit of work, but I said when I was going to start these that I'd put in an hour at a time, and well, that's the first hour up, basically. I think the improvement is dramatic. It feels much, much better in the hand. This one here, which is still to be cleaned, it just feels dirty, whereas this now feels much, much cleaner. It's smoother. I think I will be able to have, as I've been going along, I've been like rubbing off any like little bits of muck that are like got ingrained into the vellum. I think certain things, like there's the odd splodge, like that, for example, looks like a stain of some sort. I'm going to try a few different things, few different materials on it to see if I can bring that up. I don't think I'm going to be able to do much there, and I'm very reluctant to rub too hard around these the red writing here, because I think it could just rub off. But on this one then, I've got the back cover still to do. I mean, the difference is marked. I mean, it really is. And then obviously I need to go all the way through the book and make sure it's you know, internally as nice as we can possibly make it. But I think for the first stab, we're off to a really good start on these. And yeah, I'm looking forward to really cleaning them up so they look great on my shelf. Anyway, that's it for today. I hope you've enjoyed that little bit of a change of pace. I might need to mix this in with some other regular paperback cleaning videos, but we'll see how we get on. It's all down to time more than anything. Thanks very much for watching today, and I'll see you again very soon. Bye.